Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm really excited to share what I get to share today with you all. So, the topic is Shikantaza, or just sitting practice, which means meditation without a fixed object, basically. Um, yeah, that's what it is. However, it's a practice that's so easily misunderstood. Uh, I want to do today some guided practice. I'm going to stop in the middle of some of the guidance and ask you all some questions. It's not the way it's normally done, is it? Uh, and then we'll have questions and answers. But um, I've been teaching for a long time, and I know the reason I'm excited is there's a lot of tips I have to share with you that is going to help your practice. So Shikantaza means just sitting practice. Um, it means you let go of the object of meditation. You're just in the meditative state, basically. So this is something we probably all have experienced because sometimes it happens automatically as though by itself, especially if we're uh, on retreat. We get to this place where we're immersed enough in the practice that we don't have to tightly follow the breath. That can kind of drift off, and we're just meditating. How many people could I see a show of hands? How many people know what I'm talking about? How many people have found themselves in that state? Yeah, yeah. So, um, what I want to do today is to help you know how to find that place, which is the tricky part of it. I think there's times when it arises for us and we find it naturally, and I think every single person raised their hand, so that gives me a good sense of um, where we're where to start with this conversation. So, yeah, what I want to share with you is, well, how many of you have wished you could find that place again and been unable to? Yeah, yeah. So there are methods to actually find that immersion that is kind of self-sustaining. Um, Also, I know a lot of us are practicing with koans, and that can seem like a different path from Shikantaza, but I can tell you, let's see, I've been practicing for 37 years. The first few years were with Maizumi Roshi. Then I met Shishin and Daido at the same time, and I practiced for 17 years, primarily with Daido, although I always practiced some with Shishin. Um, and and then Shinko, starting when she became a teacher, and uh, and then when I formally crossed over to this lineage where we are now, that was 17 years ago. So I was 17 years practicing with Daido and 17 years with Shishin, a couple of years with Maizumi before then. Uh, when I crossed over into making this my primary lineage and Shishin my primary teacher, um, I had only done a handful of the koans. I'd done, I don't know, maybe 30 of the miscellaneous koans, and which means that for the prior 20 years, my primary practice had been breath-based practice in Shikantaza. And I don't know how to say this without just saying it, but pretty much from the time that I signed on to this lineage, Shisha and I were in conversation about me being a teacher. So you know how it is. Nobody ever says you have understanding or you've had some realization. You have to deduce it from the fact that that conversation's on the table. But as soon as that conversation went on the table, basically I said, oh, we probably have to do the koans then. And he said, yes, we probably have to do the koans then. And so 720 koans, and 12 years later, I finally became a teacher, right? Um, so what I'm saying is that the reason I'm just being upfront about that is wherever I was in practice at that point, which was being recognized in the backward way we recognize it in Zen, was it didn't come from koan practice. So I know very well that koan practice is not necessary to develop understanding, right? And even though Daido's was primarily a koan lineage, I spent years just doing just sitting practice. However, also, I think you probably all know my book, One Bird, One Stone, in which I traveled all over the country and interviewed senior students and teachers and visited a lot of different practice centers and sat with them from all sides of all camps. And there are, as I think all of you know, there are some lineages that only do just sitting practice, and there are some lineages that only do koans. Guess which one is the best? Ours. I'm not blowing my own horn or anyone else's horn, but I did, after traveling all over, I think we have a unique, and going to all these centers and meeting all these teachers. I mean, everybody is so doing it for the right reason. It's so well-meaning. But I just realized we have something unique here in the fact of a blend of practices between the Soto and Rinzai sects of Zen, where both of them are available to us in a deep way. And I'm kind of joking when I say we're the best. Every group thinks they have the best way of doing it, But there's something about the fact that we can cross from one to the other that is uniquely powerful. It just is. I remember talking to one monk who'd been practicing for must be 30 years about Shikantaza, or just sitting practice. And there's this misunderstanding that when you're doing just sitting, you just sit there and whatever happens is fine. So this monk, who he must have had 20 or 30 years of practice behind him, he said, yeah, Shikantaza is easy. I just sit there and think about whatever I want to think about. It's like, no, I don't that's not it. It really isn't it, right? It's really not it. So it's not a complete non-doing practice. Also, it's a practice that we all do even if we're working on koans, because after we're past the first few koans, if we're working on mu or who am I or something, yes, then we're sitting with that in our mind almost in a mantric way, repeating it to ourselves, or that's the usual way, right? But as we move into other koans, that's not what we're doing. When we're working on the longer case koans, we're not repeating the whole thing in our head for a whole zazen period. That just wouldn't work. The way I worked on them and the way most people, I think, work on them is you repeat them until they're firmly in your mind. And then you tussle with them for a while. And then you just have to put it on the back burner, right? How many people work with koans that way? Those of you who are working with koans. Goes on the back burner. Right? If you're not to that point of working on koans, it's fine. That's what I'm getting. I'm getting around to how you practice with the way you're practicing, okay? So, which means when they're on the back burner, we're doing Shikantaza, we're doing just sitting practice. And then if the response to a koan comes to you and you know that's the response you want, then you're not just sitting there thinking about your response over and over, are you? You go back into your sitting practice. So this is something that applies to all of us. One thing that I've come to realize in working with, most of my teaching has been with non-Zen students, because I've taught at the university for 20 years, meditation for credit, first with Daido's permission, and I won't say oversight, because he just kind of said, go and do it, which, and don't talk about anything that you haven't experienced for yourself, which is exactly the way I continue to teach. It's like we don't talk about theoreticals. We talk about what we've experienced through our own practice. So pretty good advice. I still keep to it. It used to take me about half a semester to get my university students to settle down and be sitting decently. And I've figured out some methods that is like pointing to the place in practice where it's really the point of stillness where we enter samadhi. If I came to realize that people sit down and do the practice and they don't necessarily know what that is when it appears. I've discovered there's a way to point to it. In my university classes, they're sitting well within 2 to 3 weeks now. It's remarkable how different it is. So I want to share some of this with you. Some of you are really pretty advanced students. So, and everybody raised their hand when I asked, do you know what I'm talking about when I talk about that self-sustaining practice, that we're just in it and we're not using a method. So I guess what I want to present is methods to get to the methodless. that can help us get to the methodless. And strangely, there are methods in traditional Buddhism, by which I mean Theravadan Buddhism. So the Buddha, before he became the Buddha, had practiced what they call the jhanas, or the levels of samadhi, as they're known. They were known before, they predate Buddhism. And a common formulation for them is 8 levels of immersion. And as far as they were concerned before the time of the Buddha, if you reach the 8th level and you had the techniques to get there, and it is technique based. So the Buddha mastered those. He could go to the 8th level, and it's technique based, and then you release the technique and you keep going deeper. But once the Buddha had mastered that, his teachers of the time said, that's it, you're enlightened, that's all there is. So you can go and teach, you're an enlightened person. And he did not feel enlightened. So to make his long story short, what he ended up doing, he sat with a koan, right? His koan was the question of suffering. Why do humans suffer? And what can we do about it? What is the deal here? So he used those levels of samadhi to penetrate the question of suffering, of human suffering. And it wasn't until the solution to that appeared to him, that's when he became the Buddha. That's when he thought he was enlightened, right? We will have a chance for question and answers at the end, and objections, and anything else you want to raise. But so basically, what's the difference between the levels of samadhi he learned and why he didn't think he was enlightened, and then when he became enlightened, what was the difference there? Well, he'd been sitting with a question, with the spirit of inquiry, right? So koans almost mechanically raise that spirit of inquiry, right? It's one of the reasons that they work. My natural approach to Shikantaza, which I had already found that place before I came to formal practice. I'd already learned to meditate. I can't say I had a strong practice, but I'd already, practiced with the breath and found that there was a place where sometimes you could let go of the breath, you could let go of the method, and you were just there. And so I was already doing Shikantaza in a certain way when I came to formal practice. The natural way, however, for me was I did Shikantaza with a spirit of inquiry. So I call this method Shikantaza with a question mark. It's really easy to think just sitting is just sitting and not doing anything. And in a certain way, it's true. You're not using a method, but you're interested in what's happening. Does that make sense? You're interested in what you're seeing. And it's not a passive practice. It's not a purely passive practice. It's poised between non-doing and a deep engagement. So we're deeply engaged with that self-sustaining non-doing state. Am I making sense to anyone? You see what I'm pointing to? Okay. So One of the big things that I found, several big things in my home practice, it's easy to forget that. It's easy to get into routine, especially with a home practice. It's easy to just like, you're just following the method that you learned, which is usually the breath, right? And it's very easy for that to get pretty intermittent. It's pretty easy for a home practice, even if you're doing Shikantaza, or even if you're working with koan at home, it's pretty easy for your practice to have gaps in it. I had a good friend of mine who's practiced Zen for more than 30 years come and sit in on one of my university classes. And to my amazement, after the class, she said, I never heard that instruction before, that you follow the whole length of the breath, beginning, middle, and end, and you notice how it changes. I thought, what has she been doing for 30 years? I know she's been doing something because she's a developed practitioner, but I think she was probably missing the boat on certain things. It's easy to think we're following the breath, for instance, which is the method we're going to use to enter. It's easy to think we're following the breath when we're actually following some idea of the breath. We're not really in the breath. So we can enter into discussion here already, and then we'll go back to some guidance. But how many people can point to where they feel the breath in the body? Can anybody point? Can you all point? Let me see you point. Where do you feel it? Okay. Okay, Lisa, I really want to see everyone. Where do you see? Okay. Okay.
Well, it's moving.
Eddie Lee's got the best response, which is he feels it in his armpit. Okay, very good. Now he's feeling it down here on the ribs. Okay, so the first thing that gets missed a lot, and I'm glad to see everyone somewhere in the body, is that meditation is primarily a physical practice. It's not primarily a mental practice. We're letting go of mentation. We're letting go of concepts. We're dropping into the body, physicalizing the practice. So that thing that my friend didn't quite see is that, okay, she was probably somewhere in her body in a vague way, following the breath in a vague way, but this is something that comes from Vipassana, is really in a granular, close way, focusing in on the ever-changing sensation, really physically, really in the body, beginning to end. Right? It's not easy to do, even if our attention is mostly in the body somewhere. It can the sensations can feel vague at first. I don't know that it's the sensations that are so important. It's the quality of our attention to them that's important, right? So I want to show you a couple of methods that I use. Now, there's a lot of emphasis on the hara or dantian. So hara or dantian, right, is a couple inches below the navel. It's not on the front of the body. It's back in the center. Actually, for most of it, it's a little more close to the actual spine than exactly in the center. Everything I'm going to share with you is not something we can make happen. And probably a lot of us have tried to make our attention go to the dantian. It doesn't really work, does it? It bounces back up. So if you've been in the heart, great. So there's what you have to do is allow it to drop deeper. The heart's a great place to practice from, but in our system, the spiritual center of the body is in our center of gravity, right in the middle of the body. And I won't go too much into the technicality, but the way to find it is to take like 3 fingers, put them below your navel, press on the area below your navel. One of those areas will feel a little more tender than the other. That's an acupuncture point. I forget what it's called. It's got a number. And then if you tighten up your perineum, the lowest part of your abdomen, as though you're trying not to pee, because you're trapped in the middle of this talk and you've got to hold it, right? If you tighten that up and you take that feeling from the bottom of the abdomen and you intersect it with the feeling that's coming back from that point on your fingers, does that make sense? Here's the feeling from under your navel, here's the feeling from your perineum. The place where the hara is where those two things meet, and it might not even be exactly there. But can you let your mind drop there and really see if you could feel that? It helps to actually tighten your perineum. This is used in certain Rinzai sects. So it's not like out to lunch stuff. It's just stuff that isn't in our lineage that other lineages use. It comes from Taoism, that emphasis. And then when your mind has more or less found that center point, it's said to be about the size of a pea. Then you move a little to the left and right, up, down, back, forth. This is such nerdy, geeky stuff, but it really helps. Can you feel the point where there's a little energy or heat sensation or magnetic sensation? Can you feel that? How many people can kind of feel it when you put your mind in there? Yeah. If you can't, I understand. It's hard to get your mind down there. So an image that I found useful is, let's close our eyes for a minute and just take in this image. If you tossed a rock in a swimming pool filled with jello, a flat rock, it would make its way down to a resting place, drawn by gravity in no particular hurry. And in just such a way, we can let our attention drop out of, let's face it, where it usually lives, in our heads. And it may drop into our chest or heart area if that's where you're accustomed to feeling it. But what we want to do is allow gravity. It's as though gravity keeps drawing it down. We're not pushing it down, we can't push it down. But as gravity is acting upon our attention, at the same time, the hara, that point that we just looked at, it has this little magnetic pull. Can you find that? In other words, it's like in the old Star Wars TV show and the films that have come afterwards, when they approach a planet, they turn off their engines and they somehow connect with a tractor beam, and the tractor beam pulls them in to the planet. Okay, there's a little tractor beam in the hara. If we stop trying, we let gravity and the magnetic field of the hara draw us. Let's just do that for a minute or two. Let's see if we can feel that natural tendency of the mind to want to settle there. So that already there's an effortless quality. You know, we all have too much stuff we gotta do in our lives. So if we approach Zazen with gotta do mind, trying, straight, it's a little bit backwards. Yes, we have to raise effort, but soon into the process, we find effortlessness. We find that the mind wants to go there. Why did we come to meditation in the first place? We wanted some serenity, some peace in the chaos, and we wanted some understanding. And if we just let ourselves drop into that because we want to, it's much more successful than trying to push our mind there. Let's just take a breath or two and see if we can feel that. Okay, how many of us could feel that magnetic pull? We're going to be doing nice things and then ruining it by talking about it. You better get used to it. Okay. So, okay, Kristen, could you feel that? Was your hand up? Yeah. Okay. I couldn't quite see everyone in the meeting room. And not only that, you've all turned purple for some reason. I don't know why. But all you purple people, you could feel that. So how about those of you who've had trouble connecting with the hara and are accustomed to being higher up in the body? Could you feel that natural tendency to be drawn down and drop? Could you feel that? Yeah. So I'd like you to work with that. I'd like you to work with that, okay, as we go forward. Also, I'd like you to notice something about it. Was it an unpleasant feeling? It's a pleasant feeling, isn't it? Okay. A lot of times as adults, we've lost the natural tendency that we had earlier in life to go towards pleasure, right? And sometimes as Buddhists, we feel like, oh, we got to deal with the suffering and pleasure. Yeah, you know, no, we want to actually use the fact that we like that quality to help draw us deeper, because otherwise we got this I gotta, okay, now I gotta do zazen now. I gotta go to the gym. I gotta. No, how about if it's really a refuge? I drop into there and I feel peaceful. It feels nice, right? It's not as exciting as certain things the mind thinks that we need, like going bungee jumping or, you know, or ascending some giant mountain or, you know, whatever. But it's a pleasant feeling, and if we let ourselves follow it, it's more than pleasant. It becomes more than pleasant. How many people could feel that it feels a little more beyond pleasant? It also feels a little significant. How many people could feel that? Feels like, oh, there's something there that's something there that something there that's something. How's that for talking about the ineffable? Okay. All right. I want to try something else with you. It's going to connect up with this. If you have some feeling still left in the hara, great. Let's work from there. We're going to work a little bit with the breath. Incidentally, this is going to be a 3-part talk. So I'm dealing with real basics here. We'll get deeper and deeper into it. But I just want to start with the ground, because especially those of us who have been practicing for a while, like my friend who's been practicing for 30 years and isn't noticing the close sensation of the breath. That's so common for longtime practitioners. So wherever your mind naturally wants to rest in the body will do. I want us to just begin by just applying our primary attention just to our exhales. So from beginning to end of the exhale, can we keep our attention steady? What does it take, 5 or 6 seconds? Even somebody who's never meditated can usually do it after a few tries. So if you ever want to share meditation with your friends, this is a great place to start. Just start with something manageable. Just keep your attention steady for the few seconds it takes to do an exhale. And then during the inhale, release any method or trying. If your mind wants to go crazy, it can go crazy until the next exhale. Let's just do a few in a row and see if you can keep your attention steady and see, without striving, just see how much you can notice about the breath, because you have the spirit of inquiry and you're interested. How much can you notice about the ever-changing sensations? Beginning, middle, end of the exhale. They're all very different, and every point in between. Again, we're working with allowing. It's a settling into this. Can we just kind of coast down the length of the exhale, and then the next exhale, and then the next exhale? So our primary attention is in some area of our body. It's rather one-pointed, feeling the sensations while steadying the mind. That you're again noticing a feeling of pleasantness. If you're not noticing, watch for that, let it encourage you. And know that if you grab the next thought, it's going to take us out of that feeling. So why would we grasp the next thought? Last thing I'd like us to notice is as though our primary attention is centered rather one-pointedly on the breath in the body in a particular place. Our broader attention can take in what's happening with the rest of the body. So just for a couple breaths, see if we can balance that. Again, it's look for the pleasure in it. Isn't it interesting to notice what happens in the entire body during an exhale? Okay, now we'll ruin this by talking about it. So, so what did you notice? Anyone?
I noticed a steadiness and just a calmness, just a steady grounded feeling, more than I
Steady.
usually do.
How many people notice something of that nature, more or less? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's funny in Zen we're sometimes suspicious of the pleasure because it's entirely possible to get caught in the bliss and attached to it. This pleasure, there are all sorts of names for it in the Theravadan Buddhist literature, like rapture, things like that. Sounds pretty in bliss. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And it's very true. I remember one of my first close encounters with Shishin Roshi must have been 30 years ago when I was at Naropa, and he was wanting to start a center in Boulder. He was living on the West Coast at the time. And we went up and looked at properties in the mountains, and there was an actual ashram for sale. And we had, as I recall, we had to walk in a long way. It might have been a mile or two. And we got there, knocked on the door, and this this guy opened up, and he's just like smiling and spacey, and you know, just like, oh yeah, yeah, we're selling the ashram, man, but it's all good, like that, and and we had this, rather peculiar, funny encounter, and then he told us we had to talk to somebody else because he wasn't the owner; he was just one of the residents. As we walked away, Shishin Roshi turned to me and he said, "He's stuck in bliss." And it's true, that we can get stuck in that bliss state, but I think that's it. So I'll tell you right now, bliss isn't it. There's some things that are better than bliss. But, how about you go to the pleasure, let your practice be pleasant instead of, you ever feel like your practice is a grim struggle? Let's try and get away from that, okay? That's definitely something I saw at plenty of practice centers when I was going around and researching my book. People like, oh, gotta get enlightenment, or whatever it is. And hey, practice is pleasurable if we just allow ourselves to feel that, you know? So what I wanted us to notice is how continuity leads to that sense of peacefulness and immersion, right? And so, those Tibetan bells where if you run the striker around the top of them, maybe 3 or 4 times without breaking contact, they start to ring. You may have also seen it done with a crystal cocktail glass. You run a wet finger around the top, it'll start to sing. What makes that work is the continuous contact, right? You break contact, it won't sing. Same thing with our practice. I'm pretty sure that on many occasions, and I know this from my own practice, over years and years and years, and touching up my practice and checking my practice, that very often I'm dipping in and out, just subtly. I'm not being steady on that. It's not hard to be steady on an exhale, is it? It's, what is it, 5 or 6 seconds? Anyone can do it. What's hard is you sit down, you're going to do a half hour, and you tell your mind you're going to be steady, and your mind goes, I don't think so, And I don't know about you all, but some part of my mind, if I'm not watching it, it'll go to that steady place, and I'll start to feel that sense of immersion and the pleasantness deepen it, begin to draw me in. And then my linear mind will go, okay, been there, done that. Now I got to think about this stuff. How many people recognize that tendency? Yeah. So there's a lot of little tips I'm giving you. I encourage you to go back and watch the video later because you're not going to retain it all. You don't have to. But one thing that was really helpful for me to learn, I learned it from, I can't remember the name of the book at the moment. Somebody recommended it to me. It's by a neuroscientist who's also a Theravadan and Tibetan teacher. And if you're interested, email me or something, or I'll bring the name of the book the next time. It's a dense tome, so I don't know that you have to go to it. But one thing I really gained from it is, from a neuroscientific standpoint, it's true that we cannot multitask effectively. But nevertheless, there are 2 factors of mind that function simultaneously. One is close awareness, and the other is broader awareness. And if you've ever been listening to your favorite song in the car while driving somewhere, and you're really immersed in the song and you're singing, you're belting it out, and singing along, and a cat runs into the street and your foot hits the brake, that's your peripheral awareness. It hasn't been asleep, right? So here's an important tip. Instead of trying to stay at that place of immersion, that is pleasant, we keep our primary attention there, but the peripheral attention is watching for the next thing that's going to come up and throw us off track. That's the sneaky part. So a lot of the secret of just sitting practice is not doing, not trying, but it's a pretty active not trying, So while we're centered in the body, after a while we forget about the breath because that pleasant feeling is enough to carry us. But we're still watching with the peripheral attention. Oh, here comes this train of thought pulling into the station, right? It's headed for Cincinnati. I don't want to go to Cincinnati. I'm doing Zazen. So if you watch the train come in, you can let it leave. If you're not paying attention, you'll be on the train and headed for Cincinnati before you know it, right? So watching what's going to break our immersion, watching for what's going to break our immersion rather than trying to sustain the immersion. Does that make sense? Yeah. I want to ask you all a question. What did you notice about the broader what's happening in the body in a broader way when we were just doing that practice with the exhale. Yeah, Jim.
It really felt like there was a bigger exhale going on too, and it was synchronizing. That's what it felt like.
What do you mean? Can you say a little more?
So as I was kind of focusing on my own exhale, right, it was kind of felt like it was getting into a rhythm. In other words, I felt like there was something else doing the exact same thing around me, or maybe
Interesting. Maybe it's a way maybe it's a way of feeling the effortlessness of it. We don't have to do anything to exhale, do we? We do it all. We do it half the time that we're breathing, right? We don't have to strive to exhale, right? We're allowing it to happen. Yeah. Anyone else notice? What did you notice? I'm sorry, I need to be reminded of your name.
Uteki is my
Once more, sorry.
Uteki.
Taki? Okay, Taki, yes. What did you notice?
Getting to that place of where the deep breath is. Remember when you said hold up the three fingers? And
Yeah.
then it focusing on the exhaling brought me to a place where it was mixed. There were mixed states there. So on the one hand, I was experiencing the pleasure that you talked about. But on the other hand, I was experiencing the pleasure of the sadness. So I got a tickle in the back of my throat and a bit of a tear came down.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things we're going to face in our practice is sadness. And, but aren't the most
pleasure in that too.
What's that? Sorry.
I was saying there's a pleasure in that too.
Yeah, aren't the best songs the sad ones?
Right, your body goes.
Aren't they? Don't you put on the weepy songs just because they're beautiful? There is a beauty and poignance in sadness. Sure, there is. Yeah. That's an interesting thing to notice. We don't have to shy away if we veer into a feeling of sadness. Yeah. Wow.
But I think too, at the same time, there's kind of a way that we go through the day, or at least I do, Sensei, where I avoid feeling.
Yes, for sure.
Pleasure is the body saying, "Oh, I can feel now."
Yeah, I can feel, and I can let go of any resistance to that feeling. It's a relief, isn't it? Yeah. That's a great noticing. Great. You got a gold star for noticing that. You got a gold star in the realm of merit. Yeah, you gain a merit point for that. Yeah. No, it's I'm keeping it light, right? But this is important stuff to notice, and it gets interesting, doesn't it? So we can get lost in the mechanics and forget this is the great adventure of our lives. What is it to be human? What's the whole deal? We can just get into I'm just following the breath. Oh my God, this is boring. No, we try and summon that interest and inquiry. We can. Usually it requires looking more closely. So, anyone else notice what the whole body and mind tends to do on an exhale? Simpler than anything we've said thus far.
Some kind of a relaxing that happens.
Yeah. So the entire body, mind, thinking mind, and emotions all tend to relax during an exhale. It's actually known that an exhale triggers the parasympathetic response, which is the relaxation response of the body. Doesn't it feel good to relax? There's so much in there. It's easier to feel the pleasure of an exhale, and it's easier to keep our mind steady because we're naturally relaxing. It's as though it's happening by itself. A little like what Jim said. There's a quality that will draw us in. So forget pushing it. You just let gravity and the relaxation draw us, and it's drawing us down, isn't it? And if it draws us down, what might we end up with our attention? We might end up in the horror, right? So if we plug into the natural aspect of all this, practice becomes easier and more pleasant. and more interesting. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want any more I gottas in my life. I got too many I gottas. I got to do this because it's good for me, right? How about, oh, this is quite something to explore. I'm into this, That's the attitude I want to summon. Koans kind of do that automatically if they work for you. But my point is, Shikantaza with a question mark. If you're not doing koans, how about the koan of the body and mind and emotions? The koan of sadness, as was just raised. So, staying interested and reclaiming that natural tendency to go towards the pleasure and allow ourselves to be drawn in and to let go. One more thing I want to show you, and then I want to be able to do a little conversation. So let's go back to just that exhale. Now, since we've identified it, see if you can feel that relaxation response through the whole body. As practitioners who've been practicing for a while, I urge you not to accept any overt held tension in the body during sitting. This is a physical practice. If we're gripping our jaw, our shoulders, our hips, our thighs, our brains, then let's use that natural exhalation response to soften and release. Now, there's always some residual tension, so I don't want you to struggle with that either. But I know about you, but very often if I just touch in on my jaw and I find I'm holding it, all I have to do is notice it. I can drop it. It may creep back, but we need to be in a relaxed state to do this properly. So if we're gritting our teeth, as we often are, it's not going to serve us. So these are, I think of them as the gaps or holes in our practice. Is our attention steady? Are we really feeling and engaged with what's happening? Are we really letting body, mind, and emotions all settle? Now, emotions may settle down to a sadness that we haven't been seeing. That's fine. We're not throwing anything away. We're just going with this tendency, let go, let go. We all know this is a letting go practice. So here's my question for you as we do this a few more times. Tell me what happens at the very end of the exhale. When the exhale is finished and the inhale's about to begin. Some of us may have a pause there, some may not. It's just a turning point, doesn't matter. Tell me what you notice about that turning point. One hint is the relaxation response is progressive through the exhale. So we get more and more relaxed through the exhale. And what happens right at that very end? The exhale's finished. The inhale's about to begin. Let's just notice that for a minute. Okay, so what do you notice? Anyone? Anyone want to go for that gold star merit point?
I'll do it.
Okay, Kristen.
Um, I notice there's kind of a stillness, and
Yeah,
when I'm really into it, there's no need to breathe out or in anymore. It just gets really still.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it amazes me that I don't pass out. Yeah.
Yeah, so not everyone has to have a pause there, but the stillness is what I'm pointing to. People also find it sometimes at the top of the inhale. again in the turning point there. There's a moment where nothing's happening. Thank God, isn't it lovely? Nothing's happening. Oh my God. My life's so full of happenings. So let's just take a minute and then we'll have a chance for a conversation. Let's just take a minute and see if we can look for what Kristen pointed out. And yes, she gets 53 merit points for that observation. So the deal is when you notice that, again, it feels pleasant. Can you just let yourself release into that still point? And then as we come into the inhale, can you invite some of it to remain with you? It cannot be grasped after. It has to be allowed to remain with you a bit. If it doesn't stick with you, that's fine. Look between the next breaths and you'll find it again. See if you can release into it. It's quite a pleasant feeling. It's quite a relief. It doesn't have to be a pause. We're just looking for the stillness. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't have to do with it. What happens if you kind of poise yourself on that stillness and just allow it to permeate your awareness? See if you can carry a little of it through the inhale to the next exhale. And then guess what? The next exhale, it all goes deeper. Deeper means deeper into samadhi, deeper into letting go of the self, selflessness. Or discovering that selflessness that's already there. Because there's nothing wrong with the self, as we know. We're just looking for a deeper place, a deeper self, really. Okay, I got to back this again because I want some time for Q&A. So, continuity of attention, so important, so important. And it's helpful to just start with something easy, like can you remain continuous on a few exhales and really release the body and let the tension drop when you start Zazen. You don't have to just like go for broke right away. And your koan can be floating there somewhere. Could you also feel that? I bet if you just go inward for a minute, you could still feel that still place. Can you feel that that also has a magnetic draw? Your mind wants to go there and it wants to draw the mind to it. In fact, if you had to physicalize that still place, might it not be resting right on the hara? Isn't that kind of funny? I don't even know what we're talking about here because stillness doesn't reside anywhere, but sometimes it's as though all these things link up and we're just drawn into the stillness and into the center of our bodies. And we don't have to do. It's drawing us in. How many people could get some glimpse of what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. Is it easier than striving? It's kind of glorious to just let ourselves be drawn into that still place. And we're just such a trying society. None of this is to fault anyone for the way we've been doing it. But then once we're in our stillness, can we practice continuity with the stillness? At a certain point, the breath goes away. That's like, I said there's traditionally 8 levels of samadhi. That, the theory in Zen is if we're looking for 8 levels, we're going to see 8 levels. Somebody just sent me an article that delineates 16 levels of samadhi. If we're looking for 16, I think we'll see 16. I forget it. Just let yourself drop. You'll go deeper and deeper. We don't need to delineate the levels, but once that naturalness of being drawn in starts to take hold, that's how samadhi happens. And what you're doing is just not going away from it. Once that still place feels really palpable, you're connected with it, what you're practicing really is just, okay, let's just take a minute. Can you feel that? Can you just drop into the stillness and just let it sustain? So guess what? That's Shikantaza. So we need some method to enter, at least at first. Sometimes on a good day, since I've been doing this for a long time, I can just sit down and go there. And you may be able to do it too. On a bad day, forget it. I need to do the method. And that's just the human mind. But let's talk a little bit. Questions, comments, objections.
I have a comment. I noticed when I started meditating, and it still comes up, that sometimes I get this really negative self-talk, like, God darn it, you just can't focus, you just can't do it. And the more I do that, the harder it is to focus. The more negative and the more shoulds I put on how I should do this.
So this is why I say our primary focus is in the still place, is in that sense of absorption, but our peripheral focus is waiting for that train. You see it in the distance, it's coming, and you ready yourself for it. It's going to come in the station. I'm not getting on. Okay, it's a subtle thing. It's just like, oh, I see that one coming. I'm not going there because this is why I practice what I'm feeling now. If I get on that train, then I'm just back to same old, same old. And so I find it more productive to watch for the thing that's going to throw me off base than to take my energy and try and keep myself on base. Does that make sense? Once that train pulls into the station and we get on it, we're going to forget what we're doing, and then it's really hard to get off the train. It's an express train. You're going to Cincinnati whether you like it or not, right? So you want to spot it when it's in the distance and not get on it. Why don't you try that? See if you can see what I'm pointing to. Primary attention in the still place, in the hara. Let yourself be saturated by that. Oh, here comes that thought. Why would I pick up that thought? It's like you're in a warm bath and the telephone rings. Are you going to get out of the bath? It's just going to be somebody trying to sell you something, right? Can you just let the telephone ring? Because you're in the warm bath and it's going to wreck your bath if you pick it up. That's the way to hold that. Any other questions or comments? I know we're almost out of time. We'll probably end the recording, but I can stay on and chat for a few minutes afterwards. In fact, I'd like to if people have further questions. Yeah, Eugen.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for these tips and also taking me through, taking all of us through a guided, a lab exercise, really doing it, as opposed to just reading about it or thinking about it. But I have a question for you, and that is when we're not in this setting of being on the cushion, which effectively we are here, and we're dealing with really difficult things that come up. A train starts to head into the station,
Right.
and the what's coming up is so difficult to deal with.
Yeah,
It may trigger trauma from our
for sure. Yeah.
sadness, that sort of thing. Can you give some pointers or tips as far as utilizing this Shikantaza backdrop and not just backdrop, but life that we're practicing with into these situations that might otherwise really knock us way off center.
Yeah, so one of the lovely things about Shikantaza is if we really saturate ourselves with it, it's a portable practice. We can carry it some way into our life. Now we're going to forget, we're going to have to practice with that. And when we lose it, it's always good to go back to the breath as our anchor. And it's always good to go back to the exhale, because that's, 3 good exhales in a stressful situation are worth a million, what are we calling them? Merit points, We're just, if we just relax, it's helpful. So one way to boil down what Zazen and all forms of meditation and spiritual practice are about is, the old sweepstakes motto, you have to be present to win. It's about practicing the present moment, which means to say it's about practicing the reality of our lives. So Zazen's actually the practice of reality. Now, if we ever just fall into, dullness and doing a method mechanically, maybe we can remember that. That's a big deal. This is the only place my life's happening. Am I going to do it or not do it? The only thing that really draws us away is thinking about it. Thinking is a wonderful tool, but it's not the tool for this job, or spacing out or falling asleep. But, otherwise we're present, we're here. So one of the things we're present to is emotion, as was pointed out earlier on. If emotion comes up, emotion's fine. But emotion tends to get multiplied by our thoughts about it. So you're in a situation where, let's leave off the train metaphor. Well, no, we'll use the train metaphor. But the person who gets off the train is your boss. And he's being a jerk, right? He's making it hard for you. Can you be with the emotion of that, which may bring up old trauma? Or do we get sucked up into, what a jerk? Why am I in this crappy job anyway? Why am I working for this guy? You can think about all that later, but the moment's just the feeling, But what happens is we start playing explanations about it, or fortunately, the boss goes off, but we carry the interchange with us. And then we keep playing it over in our heads, right? And every time we play it over in our heads, we work up the emotion more and more and more. So the closer we can stay to the primary emotion before thought. And there's something about, like when we're in the still place, how many people could see that you could kind of hold the thoughts in abeyance? That you could just let the thoughts float and not go there? Could you see that? Yeah, there's a way to do that. Just not go there, It's a bit like that. We have to be willing sometimes to sit with pain, or in that case, we're not sitting, we're in an interaction with someone. But, we also have to be willing to fail. We're not always going to get it right, If we're dealing with that jerk boss, maybe we'll blow our tops. We have to forgive ourselves, we're only human. But the main thing is the brain is pretty useless when it comes to emotion. It's trying to save us from the pain of the emotion by giving us an explanation. It rarely works, right? So we try and stay with the emotion. There's no explanation for why life is sad sometimes. Is there? Life's sad sometimes. Sometimes the sadness is beautiful. Sometimes it sucks. But we can't think our way out of it. Sometimes we're angry for good reason. Somebody's wronged us. Sometimes we can do the 3 breaths and realize I don't have to get angry over this. This is a little turf battle of something that doesn't matter. And I can just let it go. I don't know. Does that address it at all, Eugen? It's a practice, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
It's a deep subject. We'll at least 2 more talks. I'm going to be doing one of these a month, so we'll get further into it. It's just the start. This is all for you to practice with.